The Indiana Jones franchise has some of the best movie props out there, so in this video I'm going to be showing you how I made this Holy Grail from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The best free file that I found was this one over here at Thingiverse. I've linked it down below. Super simple file, not a whole lot to it. Luckily this artifact is not super complicated. This thing's going to print out in two separate pieces and all we got to do is glue them together. I printed each half separately. I printed the bottom half super fast. I printed with a 0.6mm nozzle. I printed the top half with a raft and then some normal supports so I could support that inner part there on the inside, but I blocked out those supports that you see under the cup. This is how our file looked coming off the printer. Now prepping the surface for this thing is going to be a lot easier than most other prints that you'll probably do, but the paint job for this thing is probably going to be more difficult than many of the other projects that you've done. I started off by sanding the entire surface. I started using 120 grit. You could probably use a palm sander on this, but this thing's so small and there's a lot of curves, you might as well just hand sand it. This is how it looked after we got done with that sand job. Now it's time to glue it together. I decided to go with E6000. I just spread that glue all over the edge, the hole, everything like that. And then I lined up the seams and I pushed that thing together. You don't have to line up the seams if you don't want to. I just chose to. Press and hold firmly and wipe away any excess glue, and then we're going to give it 24 hours. I decided to start with filler primer. You could probably start with a layer of Bondo as well if you wanted to, but I wanted to get some filler primer down first just to see what the surface was going to look like. Due to this file being somewhat low poly and my need for a perfect surface, I spread Bondo all over everything, but if you don't need it super perfect, or if you're able to add a lot more filler primer at the beginning and you don't feel like you need Bondo all over the whole thing, I would recommend at least Bondoing or using wood filler on the seam between the two halves and the seam running up the side where each layer started. The surface is looking pretty nice and it's time to sand our first layer of Bondo. Anytime you are sanding Bondo, I recommend iPro, but you definitely need a respirator. This dust is extremely toxic. Go through and sand the entire thing, knock all that surface down, try to knock out all those poly lines and any other layer lines that you might have. Get the surface as clean as you can. You can see mine came out pretty nice, but it is far from perfect. Do what you will on the bottom, but I also like the bottom of my models to look good as well. That means it's time for another layer of filler primer, as usual. The surface prep for this part is similar to really any other 3D print that you do. It is relatively simple because there's not a lot of lines and edges, but essentially filler primer, sand that layer, Bondo, sand that layer, filler primer, sand that layer, add Bondo where you need it, sand that layer, filler primer, sand. Do that until you're happy, and then once you are happy with the surface, add one last coat of filler primer, and our surface is ready. None of what we've done so far is all that complicated. I assume why you're here is to learn how I did this paint job. So I'm going to spend most of the rest of this video talking about the paint job. I studied lots of reference material that I could find online. It's very dark in the movie so it's hard to see, but I looked at a lot of projects that other people have done and compared them to each other to see what I would like. I ended up personally not liking a lot of the references that I found online, so I just used stills from the movie and tried to base my paint job as closely as I could on that. I knew that my first layer was going to be gold. Now you could gold leaf this thing, there's lots of options you could do. I chose the Rust-Oleum metallic paint and I covered the inside extremely well, but I also went around the outside as well because we got a lot of that chipped paint on the outside revealing gold underneath. So try to get as much gold coverage as you can. Due to the abuse that we're going to give this thing later on, I would recommend probably doing a couple coats of that gold. To get that chipped paint look, you could add some liquid mask at this stage if you wanted to. However, I didn't feel like I would have enough control that way, and I think the look that I got in the end ended up being even better than if I'd used liquid mask. Pull up reference images that you like, and then use different amounts of different colors of acrylic paints, and just mix them together, and try to change the tones here and there, add some darkness, add some lightness. The Grail is a lot of mixes of grays, reds, and browns, and you really do just need to mix those colors until you get the kind of tones that you think are more accurate. Now this is how I found to get the best chipped paint effect. Let the acrylic paints dry most of the way, so I'm talking probably 10 to 15 minutes, and then start applying masking tape. I noticed that this blue painter's tape wasn't quite strong enough, so I upped it to some of the stronger tape, and I would lay it down, pressing very firmly, and then rip it off, and it would give me this awesome look. If you don't let the paint dry long enough, the tape won't stick, it'll just slide around. And of course, if you let the paint dry too much, you probably won't be able to pull it off properly. This weathering method gave me a ton of control of exactly where I wanted the chipped paint to be. If I'd used a liquid mask, I would have been stuck with wherever I applied the liquid mask. Continue to use your reference images just to make sure that you're getting enough color and you're not getting too much color, and that you're getting the correct colors. As you can see, I'm trying to include as many clips as I can just to kind of show you what I did. I ended up doing this in layers, and I noticed that there was a lot of red in the original idol that I didn't see on a lot of the other replicas out there. So I ended up going through with this sort of red maroon that I mixed up, applying that all over the place, doing my tape, and ripping that off. I also noticed that the Holy Grail from the film is very gray. There's a lot of parts of it that are just a sort of gray wash. So I wouldn't recommend overdoing it on this stage, but I ended up mixing up some gray acrylic, and I applied this to essentially the entire Grail. Brush horizontally to simulate some of the surface effects that the Holy Grail might actually have if it was created using methods that they had a couple thousand years ago. Now, this gray ended up being way too much, and I needed to pull it back. I didn't quite know how I was going to do that. What I ended up doing was taking some nail polish, lightly soaking some cotton balls in that nail polish, and then carefully and slowly brushing that nail polish over the Grail. I had let the lower layers of acrylic dry long enough that the nail polish wasn't really pulling them up, and it was just pulling up that gray that I just applied. This gave me a really nice look. And then I went back through and applied any gray that I felt like needed some gray added back in, and I went back through with my nail polish again. I essentially just went back and forth between the nail polish and the gray until I got a look that I liked. And I went through with my tape again, doing that stick and rip method. I just wanted to include these couple of clips so that you could really clearly see how this stick and rip method works. Now if you look at the tape, you'll notice that a little bit of my gold is coming up as well. But if you were smart and you applied 2 layers of gold at the beginning, that shouldn't be a problem for you at all. And that is basically the paint job. If you use the Rust-Oleum gold metallic finish that I used, I would not recommend clear coating this thing, because that clear coat might ruin it. But you could add a matte clear coat if you want to. I really appreciate you guys sticking around all the way to the end of the video. I think I made probably one of the more accurate grails that I've seen on the internet, and I'm super happy with how it turned out. If you guys want to see how I made the idol from Raiders of the Lost Ark, I'll link that video as well. Again, thanks so much for checking this video out. Subscribe if you want to see more. I have a lot of projects in the pipeline.